And just one thing which I think you mentioned, Helen, both the you mentioned sort of the Trollope's the sensation novel. So it feels as though that some of the characters in the Eustace Diamonds don't have as much depth, aren't as three-dimensional as in, say, The Last Chronicle. Mm-hmm. And is that part of the sort of the sensation feel of the novel?
It is. It's part of the hinterland of it. That's sort of the adventure, the detective plot, the sense that there are machinations in play that involve a reduction of character. So character just doesn't get the kind of subtlety, except it's reserved for specific people, isn't it? So it's reserved for Lucy, I would say, and for some of those domestic scenes, especially near the beginning. And it comes back again. Even I would say actually around to the aging Duke of Omnium, you get a little bit of that sense of what does it take to humor and keep going an old man with a difficult psychology and the set of psychologies that have learned to operate around him, especially Madame Max. You get elements of realistic depth, but a lot of the main sensation plot is deliberately, and that's why it can be so funny, is deliberately working with stripped out stereotypes. Yeah, who are enjoying being stereotypes, who are enjoying playing to type,
because again that theatrical element.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, shall we come to Chris? Would you like to come in, Chris?
Yeah, thank you. These are actually sort of slightly general, but hopefully we could have some discussion without getting too hooked on it. Just thinking about Lucy, I'll perhaps just say all four things, then I'll shut up. How many utterly good characters in literature are actually that interesting is I think a question mark one might ask, not just of Trollope, but across plenty. Then we've noticed before that Trollope does like a bit of assonance now and again. And I'm quite interested in the short step from Eustace to useless. And actually the useless diamonds is a very interesting idea, because that's actually what they prove to be in the end. I'm also interested in, as perhaps I would be, that we don't have many utterly scandalous clergy in Trollope. We have plenty of complex characters, but maybe this is part of the theatricality of it. And I just wonder if there's any background to Trollope having such a charlatan clergy at the end of the novel. And just fourthly, because Dominic mentioned at the beginning sort of contemporary relevance, in England, in the United Kingdom, one of the reasons it seems to me that we have just ditched our Prime Minister is that he's a compulsive liar. And actually, we have decided that that is not on. And one could argue that Lizzie is a compulsive liar out of character. And I wonder if our attempt sometimes to smooth over that plays out in a really quite interesting way today. There we are, four disparate points, but I'll leave them there.
Shall I pick up on this, Dom? Okay. Yeah. Can I start with the bottom? I'm intrigued by that, because I made a decision when I spoke to the society in London not to take the political topicality of it, but it was definitely there, and I was so oppressed not to raise it at certain points. I think it's so party political in this instance, or in danger of being so. Yes, she absolutely is a compulsive liar, isn't she? And you're told numerous times that what intrigues Frank especially about her, and increasingly other people see it, is that the lies are unnecessary. She lies when there's no point to lying. So it's, for her, it seems to be part of the energy of theatre, again, of sort of enjoying playing a part and dressing up things because they're just so much more interesting if you add a bit of colour to them. It's a sort of not, and just as Thackeray is pulled into company with Becky Sharp on those grounds that there's a sort of fiction making love that draws them together and provides the basis for reading that novel semi-allegorically about the business of telling fictions. It's quite tempting to go along to a degree with that sense that there must be some kind of smittenness between a novelist making fictions and a heroine or an anti-heroine who does so much of it herself. I don't think I see it I'm thinking about Phineas Finn as a good comparator, where so much of the world of government and party politics involves a low-level kind of lying, but it's the sort of lying you see around Lord George de Bruce Carruthers here, isn't it? Where you lie about your capacity to pay back money. It's the small lies that keep the world of money borrowing and lending operational, but that the barefaced lie, or the pretending the thing that isn't, is not, I think, in operation in that political world so clearly. Do you want to run me back through them in negative order? And what was your number 3? Sorry, you'll have to unmute.
Realize I had a scandalous clergy, actually a charlatan clergy. I mean, we have clergy, plenty of clergy of complex character, but no one else, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not that widely treading Trollope, who is actually a charlatan. And I wondered what that was about.
Oh, the whole book specialism. I mean, I'm very tempted to compare him with Slope, because there's so much of that greasy oiliness of characterization going on, but it's not the same. The idea
he's not in the same league.
Dealing with not clergy at all.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. It's his closest look, as far as I can remember, at that evangelical. You know, that enormous, in itself, another form of really important theatre, that galvanizing evangelical London and hinterland world. What I'd love to know a bit more about is whether the kind of success in London, and therefore you get invited to the big estates of the aristocracy, I'd love to know whether there are real examples that have been picked up on then. I rather suspect that they are, that you have a big personality from the lecterns of London, who then turns up at summer parties in various good houses to the north or in Scotland, but I can't immediately think of who might be being targeted. I suspect there would be a group of likely candidates. Number 2?
Eustace and Useless.
Yes, it's possible, isn't it? I mean, in the past, I had simply thought that he must have been trying to avoid any near chiming with actual names of aristocracy. But you may well be right. It's that half rhyme or semi rhyme, isn't it, going on, that works well. Yeah. And the first one?
Well, don't worry. The first one was a red herring about how many utterly good characters in literature are interesting.
Yes, I mean, I think I'd ask. I take it you were saying that Lucy actually manages to be interesting, or are you not that part?
Well, I'm ambivalent about whether she's interesting, but actually, and others have expressed doubts about her, sort of too good to be true. But,
she has quite a lot of Lily Dale in her, though, doesn't she? It's that
Lily. Well, Lily might be another one who is. Are they actually interesting?
Yes, so it's another version of Lily's story, isn't it? But she's pulled back at the very brink by Frank deciding to do the right thing after all, whereas Lily, there isn't that option. And that to me is the really compelling parallel. This interest in women who sort of bloody minded. He's so interested in cussed people, people who just stick to the thing that isn't in other people's eyes their own best interest, and do so because that fixity of purpose matters more to them finally than other forms of self-interest. Well,
so I think I've had more than a go, so thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's hard to keep an eye on I think Dom is going to keep an eye on the chat.
I think Sati will be doing that for us, but can we come to Ellen for now? Ellen?
Okay, I put my hand up when Dominic said how we should look to compassionate. We should compassionate Lizzie because there's this depth of psychology. And of course, I wanted to say no. I stubbornly disliked her to the very end and found her not only a compulsive liar, but a coarse, narrow, rough mind. And where I saw the coarse, narrow, rough mind was my main point that I wanted to say. I have it there. There are actually 3 trial scenes here in a sense. Mackintosh, it's very important what she says to him. If she lies to him, she's in trouble. She has to go to Camperdown. And then there's an actual trial. And I was really struck how in many of Trollope's novels, the build up to the trial is so big. And then the trial itself is such a big thing. And then we come away. We hear that kind of thrown away. And it doesn't much matter. Okay, individual characters might be seen as punished. But overall, the whole novel doesn't work to show us any kind of neat moral line. I mean, Lucy could have ended up destitute, like a Jane Eyre character. And I remembered, and I couldn't find it, but I remembered a very old essay by A.O.J. Cockshut, these very old essay people, in which he says the novel's idea is one of moral confusion. And that's what makes it interesting as well as dark. I can't find where he said that, but maybe I made it up. But I think he said something like that. And I think it's an interesting point. And that's one of the reasons the structure may meander. I mean, we have 3 different trials. It's as if we keep trying to punish her, but she slips out because society doesn't really give a damn. Once John Eustace doesn't give a damn, nobody gives a damn. And the roughest statements is from Lord George. And I thought that was very interesting. And also just as this idea, maybe that's why the structure of the novel so meanders, because there isn't in this novel anyway. I don't know that there might not be another Trollope novels too, but I don't know that there is in this novel a kind of a thrust of a moral idea working itself out. Rather, the idea working itself is that there is no moral. The society doesn't work that way. So she can get away with it as long as she has 4,000 a year and doesn't lose that. Whereas poor Lucy, you see, she needs Frank. She reminds me of Patience Crabstick. I see Lucy as a Jane Eyre, and Patience Crabstick with her last name, Sutherland mentions that. It's very interesting. I think Peter said at the very beginning, we see all these lower class characters. We see Gager, we see Smiler, and they count in an odd way. So I don't know if that makes sense. That's my comment, that 3 trial scenes and they're thrown away. It's curious.
That is curious. I mean, if I was being crude about it, I think the other reason the novel meanders is, remember, that he breaks off from it for quite a significant portion to do his Cicero. Is it Cicero? It's Caesar, Commentaries of Caesar, isn't it? I mean, there's a really substantial break in the writing. So I've always thought, in a way, looking on the bright side as the editor, that it's remarkably consistent given how interrupted the writing was. But the 3s are, I think, part of it's a sort of testing of Frank Greystock, isn't it? I think there are 3 times as well where he comes far too close to Lizzie, and then finally he turns back. Depends what you can't count as getting too close to Lizzie, because there are a lot of scenes with her, but 3 sort of significant testings of his morality. And you're right, in the end we're given a flat statement that, you know, deep down he always knew that she was fake, and that, you know, the true prize is Lucy. So he goes back. Yeah, it's not a vestedly moral novel, but it is. What's morally interesting, I think, about it is the degree to which it asks you to think, why is it that when we know what the right answer is, so often we do the wrong thing anyway? Or we entertain the wrong thing because the wrong thing is just so much more interesting. I mean, everybody who's ever flirted when being in a relationship has had a version of that, you know, of that question.
It's convenient. It's
yeah,
convenient.
exactly. And it's fun. I mean, it's a novel about the fun of spending time with Lizzie Eustace, knowing that she's lying like a trooper and has no real reason to.
Great, thanks, Ellen. We'll come to David, John, and then Terry. And Cynthia as well. So David, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Well, all this lying like a trooper, I must respond on Liz's behalf. I'm very pleased to know that Dominic's read it again and feels much more sympathetic towards her. The wise people in this book are Mr. Dove, and I think Major Mackintosh, you know, the police commander, and the wise old attorney. That wants to really get on top of Mr. Camperdown and tell him to settle down. The 2 quotes I want to give you, which I thought was a real sting, coming on all of us actually, from Trollope. Mr. Dove says to Mr. Camperdown, "What can you get by harassing the poor, weak, ignorant creature?" continued Mr. Dove. "She has hankered after her bauble and has told falsehoods to keep in her efforts to keep it. Have you never heard of older persons and more learned persons and persons nearer to ourselves who have done the same?" So that's Mr. Dove. And as for Major Mackintosh, he says, that which had been perjury with Lord George had by the Major been so simply and yet so correctly called an incorrect version of facts. I think Trollope is saying to us, beware your own lies, you know, and your own inconvenience when it says, I'm not going to be quite so straight up on the truth as I should perhaps be. I'm not going to cast any allusions to what's going on at number 10, but I just think, Lizzie, we can all understand why Lizzie's made the statements that she made, not realizing the consequences and that it would in fact lead to perjury in a court. I think Mr. Dove and Major McIntosh, for me, got the sense of balance right. But that was in response to Chris, actually. What I put my hand up for, and you've touched on this, Helen, was these two women, Lily Dale and Lucy Morris. It's great that we're reading this book after Small House of Allington. I know there's 10 years that separate the two books, but both for me are the same character: straight, pure, loyal, loving, perfect, unspoiled. And with Lily Dale, of course, she gives her love to Adolphus Crosby, who needs really money. He needs income to be a success. He's not a bad chap, but he can't marry Lily because it's the end of his career. And the same character appears 10 years later, and the same situation arises, that Frank Greystock loves her, as I'm sure Adolphus did love Lily, but needs cash, and it's offered to him through his cousin, and my word, he's so tempted. But I think as the story progressed, Trollope said, no, this is going to have a different ending. And I think that must be the fun of Trollope writing over 30 odd weeks or whatever it is, because he probably doesn't know how these characters are going to behave as the story evolves and develops. That's me.
That's interesting. It does open up for me a question of what else Trollope isn't dealing with in the novel that he could be, because the difference between Lily's Adolphus relationship and Lucy's relationship with Frank is, I think, it's significantly changed by his being her cousin. So the cousin role makes permissive something that if Lizzie was not his cousin but rich, you would have more of a choice. Am I going to go with money, or am I going to go with the true woman who loves me? But because Lizzie is someone with whom he's allowed a certain degree of familial intimacy, the line gets blurred. And what he's not giving you, but other Trollope, so the Belton estate is the most vested in this topic of all the novels. There is a growing concern around cousin marriage and the status of cousin marriage in this period. And it is gradually becoming understood that it is not a good thing in many cases to marry your cousin. But of course, you've got the problem of the Queen, and her relationship with not her immediate cousin, but pretty close cousin, her marriage to Albert. So there are legal worries, there are historical worries, and there are very intense religious worries that go back to Henry VIII. And it can be, if you choose to make it as a novelist, a really rich topic to debate. But here that's just thinned out. So it gives permission to have a dalliance that isn't really a dalliance in the same way. It's not a moral choice in the way that the Lily Adolphus, I'm forgetting Adolphus is what's the name of the woman that Adolphus does marry. The ghastly board marriage. Someone will remind me in this group.
Alexandrina.
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Lovely. Terry, can we come to you?
Okay, this kind of follows what the gentleman before me was starting to say about what Trollope starts out as and then how the novel develops. In chapter 3, paragraph 2, he's mentioned that there might be a heroine, but it won't be Lizzie. And then the second paragraph says, nor does the Chronicle dare to put forth Lucy Morris as a heroine. The real heroine, if it be found possible to arrange her drapery for her becomingly, and to put that part which she enacted into properly heroic words, shall stalk in among us at some considerably later period of the narrative, when the reader shall have accustomed himself to the flow of words and have worked himself up to a state of mind fit for the reception of noble acting and noble speaking. And that, I guess, is supposed to be Lucinda, but we haven't really talked about her, and it's so cruel. I feel like what happens to her in her marriage and how she goes crazy. And I'm almost whether he just like threw that in, because it's just a very weird. It's so uncomfortable reading her. I mean, the parts about Lucinda. Yeah. And I just wonder what other people want to say.
Do you want to discuss that more widely before I weigh in?
Yeah, no, you go ahead, Wade.
So wait, critically, I feel I have a choice, that either this is a sign that he was setting up one kind of novel before he broke off to go and do his commentaries volume and forgot that he'd said it, and it's a Homer nods moment, or he means Glencora. I don't see him meaning Lucinda, and I think it's that investment in Glencora's social courage and the way in which she reaches out to Lizzie in a bad judgment moment, and then uses Lizzie, more importantly, actually, as the way of keeping the Duke of Omnium alert and engaged and loved. It's a practical form of love in a way, what she's invested in. You get some very interesting discussions as well about generosity and what it is to be rich and generous, and how generosity is in some ways easier if you're rich, but in other ways is more of an obligation, a sort of social obligation. So you get some fabulous bits of Glencora in the background. We spent a lot of time at the Trollope Society dinner in London talking about Lucinda and this rewriting, because it's a really important rewriting of The Bride of Lammermoor. So Trollope has just reread Scott's novel and couldn't stand it. He just had a number of works, not just one, rejected by publishers. So he's a bit sore. And then he reads this extraordinarily successful novelist of the previous Romantic generation, still absolutely an icon of the Scottish literary scene. He goes up there, he rereads it, and he comes into a dinner, and I'm sorry, I'll be really brief for those of you who heard this in London, but insults everyone at the dinner by telling them that Scott simply wouldn't pass muster nowadays. He'd never get a contract because he's so boring. So what he does is to take the same plot and thicken it out by giving you a really painfully dramatic encounter between two people who don't just not want to marry each other, and don't not want to marry each other because they're both in love with someone else, but hate each other. There's a viciousness and an intent to hurt even in the act of marriage. I know you hate me, and therefore I will make you marry. That, the whole business about dominating and exploiting and treating a woman as cruelly as one might a horse if one were a bad horse rider. It's brutal to read, and particularly nasty because of the way the aunt mother forces Lucinda through it. So it gives a sort of thickness and depth and horror of characterization to the same plot that Scott had handled. Not everybody likes stuff. I find it tremendously powerful. It deepens on me as I get older. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we talked a lot about Lucinda. Thank you. We'll come to Cynthia, then Keith, and then I think maybe we'll come to Sati to see what's going on in chat. So Cynthia, can we come to you?
Yeah, first of all, I think there's a difference between lying, even lying a lot, and compulsively lying. That's number one. Number two, Lizzie does not love a single living person. And that's her real hollowness, in addition to the fact that she's lying to everyone. She doesn't love her son. She certainly didn't love her husband. And she can't even sustain a friendship. She doesn't even love Frank enough to think, well, he'll be happy with Lucy. She's just not capable of that. And I think that's the real defect in her character. And I don't excuse people because their parents weren't nice. I mean, that, under that reasoning, I could be horrible. The other thing is, I disagree with Ellen about the trial scene. Having done Orley and Phineas, I think I would rather go to jail for a month or two for perjury than marry Mr. Emilius. And I think to have another trial, he's kind of been there, done that. And this is, perjury is it's not like the perjury in Orley Farm where it really matters. Here, the diamonds are gone. It's like, forget about it. That I want to say that. And then finally, as to Lucy, it's not that she's going to be impoverished. She was a governess. She was beloved by the Fawn family. She did a good job. She lived well. And Lady Fawn was certainly going to make sure, when she wasn't welcome at Bobsborough, that she got another terrific placement. And we always talk about the weak women in Victorian literature. And here's a woman who is ready to earn her living, who's not going to go where she's not welcome, and will do a good job. And okay, maybe that's boring, but I really respect her for that. And I also respect her for knowing Frank well enough to know that he really does love her, even though he's being weak. So those were my comments.
I like that. It is, just following on from your last comment, it is, I think, the most benign portrait of a governess that I can muster from Victorian fiction. I mean, it's a sense of what might happen if it went really well and you were knit into the family. It's not quite clear that they do a lot of education, but some.
Sorry, I was on mute. So we'll just come to Keith and then we'll pop to Sati. I've just caught Pauline's very kind email message has just caught my eye. So thank you for people if this is your first big read or your first read of Trollope, I do hope you've enjoyed it and come back for Can You Forgive Her? But Keith, can we come back to you now?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the Jewishness. In Victorian society, the Jews, as we saw in, well, we didn't see in this, but in Oliver Twist, the Fagin character, and they were had been derided all the way down the centuries for not firstly not being Christian and everything. But who else could Trollope stereotype that would immediately have his audience think, well, there's somebody who's going to do a dirty trick. There's somebody in Benjamin who's prepared to buy what's obviously stolen property. And also, I think that carries on with the fact that he's got contacts in Europe where he can go and sell the stuff. Always the Jews were thought of as knowing people on the outside who would do something else. And I don't feel that Trollope's being anti-Semitic by using the Jew as that character. I just feel that it's something that the audience felt at the time was the character. I don't know what they put in today, and I would be, and I am Jewish, I would be particularly upset if Trollope's novels were censored because people felt he was anti-Semitic. I think it all fits in with what the feeling was at the time of the outsider or whatever. And regrettably, and nothing to do with Jewishness, regrettably now, we've got different outsiders who are probably treated in the same way, as with the suspicion of the general public. So I don't feel it like that personally. And of course, I've read a lot of novels that where the Jew is picked on and everything. And I just, as I say, I just feel it was common currency at the time, and immediately put the then audience against the person concerned, or with a feeling that they know what type of character that guy would be.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's not incompatible with what I was saying about coarsening, deliberate coarsening around servants and all these minor characters, the characters who steer the sensation plot effectively in the detective plot. But it's a perfectly fair rebuttal to say, well, it's a form of laziness, isn't it? And build a literature around it, and you've got problems if it's not contested. Everything changes with Daniel Deronda, obviously, because there you get an absolutely major intellectual novel which puts the question of what it means to represent Jewishness on the table for fiction writers. But even before that, you've got Dickens in Our Mutual Friend giving you a more compassionate version of a Jew that in some degree makes up for, or at least gives you an alternative to what he'd earlier done with the Shylock figure himself in Oliver Twist. So it feels as if Trollope is just on the cusp of something changing, where it's not so easy to be casually anti-Semitic.